In this tutorial, I want to look at just some of the ways that you can create transparency within Substance Painter. And really, it's just about working with masks within here, which is part of the power of how Substance Painter works. So let me just go in. I've already brought in a model, and I have created some maps from this as well. I've just baked that out. So let's go in and let's just create a filler. And set some properties here. So let's go ahead and make this metallic. Let's make this a bit more shiny. And let's leave that at that. Okay. And then I'm going to create another filler. And on this one, I'm going to make this. In fact, let's just take the normal and height and emissive off here. I'm going to make this non-metallic. I'm going to make this a little less rough. I'm going to make this red, just so we can see a definite difference between the two. Okay. So the first thing to note is that obviously layer order is important. Let's give these names. Okay, so whatever is on the top is going to show over the other one. So in this case, if we have the red paint on top, that's going to override the shiny metal below it. And that's the first thing to note. So in terms of actually seeing through parts of this image, which is essentially what we want to do, there's a couple of different approaches to creating these, but all of it really is to do with masks. So what I can do, just do it with this red paint there, is I can right click over the layer and we can add some masks. So we've got different options in here. So we've got white mask, black mask, we've got a bitmap mask, and we've got a mask with a color selection. And then we've got some other things to do with the masks themselves on here. This is also here as well, so we can add a mask on that, and we can click on that. We've got the same properties on there as well. So firstly, if I was to add a white mask, what this is going to do is it's just going to retain all the information that's currently on this layer. Okay, so white denotes a full, it's fully opaque. If I just undo this, if I was to go in and add a black mask, then what that's going to do is it's going to make this layer completely transparent. So black denotes complete transparency. Okay, anywhere in between, in terms of grayscale, is going to be a semi-transparency within there. So once we have this, and this is often what I'll do, I'll create a base layer and then add a black mask and then start bringing back elements of this layer. We can do do this in a couple of different ways. So what I can do is click on this, and if we have this selected initially, we can actually paint on this. So right now I've just got a standard brush, I've just got my grayscale value set to white, and I can actually paint on this. And what that's going to do is it's going to start revealing the contents of this layer because I'm painting in white. So essentially I'm painting in fully opaque on this. Okay, so just paint that in. And we can use different brushes as well to get exactly the same effect. So if we want to build up the look of it or create a certain pattern to that, we can do. If you want to see your actual transparency on this, or the way that your mask is working, we can alt click on the mask and we can actually see that and work with that in purely grayscale values. To go back, I can just alt click on the base layer and we can get back to that. Okay, so that's sort of the first way of actually creating transparency. We can just paint that transparency in wherever we want to. If I want to get rid of this mask, I can just right click and I can either clear the mask, or if we want to get rid of it completely, we can right click and do a remove mask. So let's just go to the shiny metal. So I'll pull this up on top of the red paint, and again what I will do with this is just right click and add a black mask. So we're getting rid of all that information. Okay, and again just to show that I can do the same thing. So that's one way of creating the mask. I can do it that way. Actually, let's just remove this. So the way we can do this is by using a bitmap mask. A bitmap mask is basically an image that we can use. So if we import a black and white image or a grayscale image in from, if we make something in Photoshop, for example, we can bring that in to Substance Painter, and then we can use it as our bitmap mask. Alternatively, we can use some of the built-in procedurals or grunges within Substance Painter as well. So if I click on Add Bitmap Mask, it's going to ask me to look for something, and if I just, for example, type in grunges, I'm going to go into my grunges folder, and let's just choose something quickly, and there we go. We're actually using that particular image or that particular procedural mask bitmap as our mask. Okay, so again, if I alt click on that, you can see how that's working. And the nice thing about this, especially with the procedural images, procedural bitmaps within here, is we do have the ability to change this as well, change these around, and that will change the way that this mask is working. So that's another way. So again, what I'll do is I will get that, and let's right click, and let's just remove that mask. Okay. Another way we can do that version of it is if I create a black mask on here, and then right click, and down here we can also put on certain properties on there. So if I add a fill on there, I can do the same thing. I now have an image input that I can just drag something onto there, and then that's going to use that as our transparency, as our mask. Again, if I alt click on that, you can see how that's working. Okay, so we can do it that way as well, and that's a way that I use quite a lot. Okay, so let's get rid of that one. Start from fresh. So a third way, so we have our paint layer, or our paint method, we have our fill method that we can use, or rather down here. A third way is the generators. So with the generator, what I need to do first of all is just add another black mask. Click on this, and let's right click, and let's add a generator to that. So with a generator, I can go in, I can select a generator, so let's use a common one, metal edgeware. And what this is going to do is it's going to create a mask based on certain properties. So these are created using Substance Designer, and there's certain properties in here and certain maps that this will use to create the mask itself. So this is actually using ambient occlusion and curvature masks to create this look here. And again, the great thing about this is we can go in and we can customize this. So I can change the curvature weight on this, I can change the grunge scale, we can really add to the mask itself and customize this as we need to customize it. So that's yet another way. So that's a third way. So I can get rid of that generator. I can just click on this X here to get rid of that, cross, and go back to our normal mask. Now, another way that can be useful, particularly if you're using high poly details to bake out, is to use what's called a color ID. So on this particular mesh, these rivets here, these ones around here, don't actually exist on the low poly model. They are baked out as high poly details. So let's just go into Maya for a second. So this is my high poly mesh, and these are all individual bits on there. If I look at the low poly mesh, they actually don't exist. So what you can do in Maya is, I'll just do it on a couple of these. If I wanted to bring this in, I can select a couple of those, and what I'll do is I'll just right click and add a new material. Just for the sake of this, I'm just going to Lambert, and I'm just going to put a color on this. Let's say we have that as red. And there we have those out, and I can actually export that out with these different materials. Once I've got that within Substance Painter, I would have to do a bake on that. So if I just go to the texture set settings, I'm not go through the whole procedure, but just to show you where this is for bake mesh maps. And you can see here, I've just got this ID, and I'm actually using, I've made two high poly versions. I've actually made a high poly version with just a basic Lambert material over the entire thing. And then I've made, for the high poly detail, I've just made another one called ID as well. Now they can be the same thing. You just don't want to have different materials on your low poly version that you bring in, because that's going to bring in more different texture sets here. So I've got my ID, click on that. The main thing on there is a color source. It defaults to vertex color. I want to change this to material color, so it's using whatever color we set in the material itself. Okay, so in this case, red. Then we would bake that out. So I'll just close that down. So let's go into this, and what I can actually do, I can do this one of two ways. Again, if I just remove this mask, I can click on this and add a mask with a color selection, and that's going to ask me to pick a color. Or alternatively, I can click on the mask and right click, and we can add a color selection there as well. So with this, if I just go over, we've got this color ID mask. If I just pick a color, you see it brings up this, and I can just go in and pipette on a color there. So you can see we've actually put that material over those areas. We wouldn't actually be able to do that without painting those areas in manually, because, as I said earlier, that geometry doesn't actually exist. Okay. We can actually add more colors to this as well if we wanted. I could go in and add some other areas if I wanted that as well. On there, we can do that. And one of the things we do have on here, we have a couple of options. I have this hardness. I can bring this in and out, so we can create a softer selection around that. And we also have the tolerance as well, which I can increase based on the color. I have to be careful you don't bring this up too much, because it's going to actually start bringing in other colors on there as well. So just making sure that's still black and white. Okay. Now, one of the things you've just got to be careful about with this is it does create a bit of a anti-aliasing around the side on there. You can kind of see on here where probably I've got the tolerance a little high. Go back to this, bring that tolerance down. So that's just something to watch out for. Okay, but that's quite a nice way to do things like that if you're using high poly details that are baked in and you want to actually put material on that. Let's say the only other way to do it is to actually go in and paint over those with a brush. So that's our color selection. The final way that we can create masks is, and again, I'm just going to create, I've just got my base mask on this, is by using our polygon fill. So I'm going to bring up my UVs as well for this. So I can do this in two different ways. I can actually go into a polygon fill. We can just go over and choose certain polygons, so I can create a mask out of those. Obviously, I don't want to select those. So this is based on this color down here. I can go in, I can change this to black, and I can just go over those bits there, paint those back out. Okay, so I can do it that way. I can go onto a mesh fill. So if this is a separate mesh, it's not welded on, I could just click on, change this back to white, click on that whole thing, and then we get the entire mesh. So click on that, for example, to get those areas. Or if I just wanted to get a certain area separated out but not on the mesh, I can use my UV chunk fill. So if I click on that, say I wanted the front of this to be this metal but the back not to be, I can just click on this UV shell here, and there we get that but not the other side. So this is just, you could consider within your UV shells how you're actually going to apply materials as well. This could be something you need to think about in the exporting process. And again, you can see there's our alpha. Okay. Now, another thing we can do with this is we can actually build up the masks. So I just have my mask here created out of the polygon fill. Just going to go back to my brush. We can add more things to this. So say, for example, I wanted to break this up a little bit. What I could do is I can right click and I could go and add a fill there. And if I add a fill into this, you can see this has overridden the entire thing. This is actually filled in just with a grey, mid-grey, so that's why it looks pink. It's a semi-transparency. So let's say we change that to black. So we've got black on this. If I switch this off, we still have our mask on there. This is just overriding it. Okay. So on this fill, I'm just going to bring in something with a bit of black in this. Yeah, so we just bring in this crunch blats and have that on there. And again, if I click on this, you can see what we've got there. Okay. So if I go over this, we can start playing around with the blend modes on these. So say for example, let's just go back to this. So on here, this is white. I want to introduce some black to this to break this up a little bit. I have that mask. Okay. So I can go into this, click on this crunch blats. Let's go over to this and let's try doing something like a screen maybe. Let's try multiply. There we go. So what we've done is we've got rid of the white areas of that mask and we've added in the black areas. So that you can see we've actually merged those two together. Okay. Actually, if I just click on this, I think I can move down on there. You see where we can start bringing these two as one thing. So something like a subtract worked quite nicely on this. Look on that. So actually what we're using is our underlying pattern to just break out some of the transparency, or some of the transparency on our original mask on there. Okay. And we can actually keep building up the complexity by adding more and more of these on here as well. So the other thing we could do is I could go in and I could add a paint onto this. So this allows me now to get my paintbrush. And let's just change this over to a black brush. And again, I can start adding to this mask. Just click into here. So I can just start painting, make sure I'm on my paint layer. I can just start painting into this now. And again, carry on changing the complexity of our mask. You can build that up and build that up. So really powerful. And we can keep building these up and keep playing around with the blend layers as we need to. Okay. So that's a bit of an introduction to creating masks in different ways. So remember we have our masks themselves, the white and the black mask. We have our bitmap mask. We have our mask with a color selection. Or we can use our polygon fill, so not necessarily a mask, but a way of actually creating masks quite quickly based on either geometry or UVs. And then we can actually combine different methods to create a more complex mask as well.